Hi, this is Green Philosophy. Today I'm going to be sharing highlights from Why You Should Hate the Rich Even More by Chris Hedges. The ultra-wealthy hover above the realities of the world around them like extraterrestrial aliens. Their material reality physically separates them from the rest of society with gated communities and private jets, but paradoxically, their very wealth severs them psychologically, unable to understand the reality of the 99%. Chris Hedges brought in Larson. Larson begins by bringing attention to basic data points that nakedly reflect the state of the world, and particularly the US, when it comes to wealth inequality. The richest 1% owned 35% of all US wealth, and that's cash, that's real estate, that's all kinds of investment portfolio assets. The bottom 50% of all US households, very similar to the bottom half in most regions of the world. You're looking at about 1.5% of the national wealth is owned by half of the population. This growth wealth imbalance produces a number of problems within a society, including the wealthy's overarching influence into policy making. Tax breaks, deregulation, and other neoliberal doctrines have defined the last few decades of American politics, and that imbalance means there's more cash chasing the same number of assets. It just tends to have the effect of hideously inflating every asset market, making housing out of reach for many people, making the market absurdly overpriced. The rich are different from us, F. Scott Fitzgerald is said to have remarked to Ernest Hemingway, to which Hemingway allegedly replied, "Yes, they have more money." The exchange, although it never actually took place, sums up a wisdom Fitzgerald had that eluded Hemingway. The rich are different. The cocoon of wealth and privilege permits the rich to turn those around them into compliant workers, sycophants, hangers-on, servers, and flatterers. Wealth breeds, as Fitzgerald illustrated in The Great Gatsby and his short story, The Rich Boy, a class of people for whom human beings are disposable commodities. Colleagues, associates, employees, kitchen staff, servants, gardeners, tutors, personal trainers, even friends and family bend to the whims of the wealthy or disappear. Once oligarchs achieve unchecked economic and political power, as they have in the United States, the citizens too become disposable. The public face of the oligarchs bears little resemblance to the private face. Chris Hedges, like Fitzgerald, was thrown into the embrace of the upper crust when he was young. Hedges was shipped off as a scholarship student at the age of 10 to an exclusive New England boarding school. Hedges had classmates whose fathers they rarely saw, arrived at the school in their limousines, accompanied by their personal photographers and at times their mistresses, so the press could be fed images of rich and famous men playing the role of good fathers. Hedges spent time in the homes of the ultra-rich and powerful, watching his classmates, who as children callously ordered around men and women who worked as chauffeurs, cooks, nannies, and servants. When the sons and daughters of the rich get into serious trouble, there are always lawyers, publicists, and political personages to protect them. George W. Bush's life, along with Donald Trump's, is a case study in the insidious affirmative action for the rich. The rich have a snobbish disdain for the poor, despite well-publicized acts of philanthropy, and for the middle class. These lower classes are viewed as parasites, annoyances that have to be endured, at times placated and always controlled, in the quest to amass more money and more power. Hedges' hatred of authority, along with his hatred of pretensions, heartlessness, and the sense of entitlement among the rich, comes from living among the privileged. It was a deeply unpleasant experience, but exposed Hedges to their insatiable selfishness and hedonism. Hedges learned as a boy who were his enemies. The inability to grasp the pathology of our oligarchic rulers is one of our gravest faults. We've been blinded to the depravity of the ruling elite by the relentless propaganda of public relations firms that work on behalf of corporations and the rich. Compliant politicians, clueless entertainers, and our vapid, corporate-funded popular culture, which holds up the rich as leaders to emulate and assures us that through diligence and hard work, we can join them, keep us from seeing the truth. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy, F. Fitzgerald wrote of the wealthy couple at the center of Gatsby's life. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. Aristotle, Niccolo Machiavelli, Alexis de Tocqueville, Adam Smith, and Karl Marx all began from the premise that there is a natural antagonism between the rich and the masses. Those who have too much of the goods of fortune, strength, wealth, friends, and the like are neither willing nor able to submit to authority, Aristotle wrote in Politics. The evil begins at home, for when they are boys, by reason of the luxury in which they are brought up, they never learn, even at school, the habit of obedience. Oligarchs, these philosophers knew, are schooled in the mechanisms of manipulation, subtle and overt repression, and exploitation to protect their wealth and power at our expense. Foremost among their mechanisms of control is the control of ideas. Ruling elites ensure that the established intellectual class is subservient to an ideology, in this case, free market capitalism and globalization, that justifies their greed. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships, Marx wrote. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas. This has been a summary of Why You Should Hate the Rich Even More by Chris Hedges. I look forward to your questions and comments.